For every 10 greenhouse tomatoes imported to the United States, 7 of them come from Mexico. The country is one of the most prolific suppliers of the fruits and vegetables we rely on for good nutrition. But how exactly do those fresh tomatoes or eggplants or peppers go from the fields of Mexico to American produce aisles and ultimately your plate? A new Los Angeles Times investigative series sheds some light on the process. December 7th, the Times released the first of 4 stories that detail the work conditions of hundreds of Mexican farm laborers who harvest some of the produce we consume. Times reporter Richard Morosi, along with photographer and videographer Don Bartoletti, spent 18 months traveling through 9 Mexican states to visit labor camps and interview farm workers. Morosi and Bartoletti found that despite labor laws in Mexico, camp bosses at many of the labor camps in question withheld pay from workers until their contracts, typically 3 months, ended. During those 3 months, the workers, some younger than 14 years old, reside in windowless rooms with pest infestations, no beds, and sometimes no running water. Morosi reports that in some camps, workers are often not permitted to leave before their contracts expire. Despite the rules and standards American grocery chains have established for their suppliers' labor practices, Morosi reports that some U.S. companies have purchased produce from Mexican suppliers that get their products from these farms. These conditions have led some farm workers in the region to ask this key question.
Hace muchos años hablábamos de mejorar la semilla en los chiles, hablábamos de mejorar las semillas en las berenjenas, el modo de cultivo, pero nos olvidábamos de los que trabajaban ahí, ¿no?
Joining me now from San Diego is Los Angeles Times reporter Richard Morosi. Rich, tell me what we need to know about the labor conditions that produce our produce.
Well, first thing, what we have to emphasize is that most Americans don't realize how much of our produce comes from Mexico. Fully 50% of the tomatoes that we eat here now come from Mexico, and they're produced largely at these enormous mega farms that produce tens of millions of pounds of tomatoes. So to cultivate and pick all those tomatoes, you need a large labor force. So they recruit some of the poorest people on the continent from these poor mountain villages and move them hundreds of miles and house them in these labor camps in the middle of these big farms. There's thousands of folks. And so they're seasonal workers, and they spend much of their time picking. And at night, they go home to these squalid labor camps where they live for months at a time.
So we showed a very distressing image earlier of a baby lying in a crate. What does that have to do with this story?
Yeah, the folks who were in that picture were picking for a chili pepper farm down in southern Sinaloa. The housing there is really, really of poor quality, and that wasn't exactly a labor camp there. That was a chili pepper plant, but these folks were living in very trying circumstances without not much attention given to them.
So when you say chili peppers, one of the things that was most stunning to me as I was reading these pieces is that some of the laborers who are picking, particularly the chili peppers, are adolescent kids, 10, 11, 12 years old. Yeah,
I found that largely in the chili pepper harvest, where and it's a huge demand here in the United States for chili peppers. And since it's a small plant, it's about 3 feet high and it's about a 3-inch long chili peppers, it's perfect for cultivation from children. So if you go to many chili pepper fields in Mexico, you see a lot of children working with their families. And they have a nomadic existence. They travel from farm to farm, village to village, year round, following the chili pepper trail. And we followed the travels of a 12-year-old girl, Alejandrina, for a year as she traveled with her family picking chili. She hadn't been in school for years.
So beyond the kind of moral outrage we may feel, how are American consumers and American businesses implicated and complicit in these conditions?
Well, there's largely a lack of public awareness of labor conditions of farm workers in Mexico. So when I went down there, I was kind of shocked at the conditions. I went into these labor camps and found that folks have these contracts that withholds their pay, so effectively traps them inside the labor camps. Also, they fall deep in debt in these high-priced company stores, and they can't leave until they pay off debt. So there's this cycle of deepening debt keeps them trapped and tethered to the farm and keeps them there during the season. Now, corporate American companies, which are the biggest in the U.S., Walmart, Safeway, Albertsons, all of the biggies, including restaurant chains, they source much of their produce down there, especially in the winter months, and they have vendor codes of conduct, social responsibility guidelines that when I was down there, I didn't see much enforcement of these guidelines.
I will say Walmart did send us a statement saying we have a focus on positively impacting our global supply chain. We care about the men and women who work in it. We know the agriculture industry is important to Mexico. We continue to work with our suppliers to help ensure our standards for suppliers are upheld. That said, if I am a consumer, and that's mostly what I am at this point on this supply chain, how, just in 15 seconds, can I be an ethical consumer?
Well, at this point, there aren't any organizations set up to improve farm labor conditions down there. What happens is consumer groups have made an impact in the apparel and garment industries, forcing companies to act to enforce their guidelines. And there are certification bodies in Mexico that are apparently pushing these now and trying to get these companies to sign on to verifications to make sure that that all of these codes of conduct are being enforced.
Thank you to Richard Morosi in San Diego, California. Viewers can learn much more about this story through reading your reporting online now at latimes.com. The story up now is called Children Harvest Crops and Sacrifice Dreams in Mexico's Fields. Still to come this morning, what the Panama Canal has to do with asthma in Newark, New Jersey. And Bill Cosby finally speaks regarding the allegations leveled against him. There is more MHP Show at the top of the hour.